This week, a heads of state meeting is being held at the NATO headquarters in Brussels, and the agenda is expected to be dominated by questions about Russian interference in the West. And at the same time, NATO member Turkey is pressing ahead with a plan to buy a missile defence system from Moscow. I'm Andrew Hopkins, and I'm speaking to Turkish Presidential Senior Advisor Gulnur Aybet one-on-one. First of all, because of Donald Trump, I think there's going to be a lot of attention at the summit on NATO funding, also Russian interference in, for instance, the US presidential election, maybe in Western Europe, cyber attacks, that kind of thing. Are any of these issues of concern for Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be two contentious issues, I think, that dominate this summit. One of them is NATO's relations with Russia, and the other one is burden sharing. Now, burden sharing has been on the agenda of NATO for a very long time, so it's not something that really came on the table since the Trump administration came to power. It's been around since 1968, but it's one of those issues that, although how contentious it may be in NATO, it's not one of concern for Turkey, because Turkey, on the contrary, has actually been increasing its defense expenditure, and Turkey's been turning its national defense industry around. So whereas before only 20% of Turkey's defense industry was nationally produced, now about 60% is. So for that reason, and Turkey wants to continue on that level, so and increasing its national defense expenditure for that reason. But the other issue, Russia, of course, is of interest to Turkey, because Turkey does have close relations with Russia. It's cooperating with Russia in terms of Syria. There's the purchase of the S-400 missile. And of course, Russia is a good trading partner and a neighbor for Turkey, let alone it has two important energy projects with Turkey. So for those reasons, Turkey would not want a very strong anti-Russia stance coming out of this summit, but Turkey has always been adhering to one of the basic tenets of NATO policy, which is the 1967 Harmel report, which called for deterrence and dialogue with the Soviet Union. And I think that still stands in the way that the alliance deals with Russia.
I think some American politicians and politicians from elsewhere see the S-400 missile defense system deal as part of the issue of Russian interference, that this is something that's trying to drive a wedge between Turkey and its NATO allies. How does Turkey see it?
Well, under NATO rules and regulations, there's nothing that inhibits a NATO member from pursuing acquisition of defense equipment from another country. So that's why Secretary General Stoltenberg has said over and over again that Turkey has absolutely every right to pursue its own options for its national missile defense system, and that includes the S-400. So it's not something that jeopardizes NATO. So we have to be very clear about that. But some NATO allies have voiced their concerns about the S-400 because the sale of this highly sophisticated piece of equipment by the Russians to a NATO member, as far as they see it, opens up an extra sphere of, extra area, if you like, of influence in the region for Russia. So they don't want to see Russia, first of all, building that influence, and secondly, they don't want Russia to build a wedge between NATO allies. So those concerns are actually quite separate from the technicalities of the S-400 purchase and what they mean for NATO defense. These are more political concerns. And I think, NATO allies have every right to voice those concerns, but we've time and time explained to them that this in no way jeopardizes relations within the alliance, and it doesn't jeopardize alliance solidarity in terms of defense.